Welcome to a Wiser Retirement podcast. Before we get started with the episode, I want to tell you about a new ebook available on our website called Buyer Beware. Why do they keep trying to sell you that annuity? This ebook covers the various types of annuities, negatives to owning annuities, and better investment alternatives to annuities. To download this ebook, you can click the link in the episode notes or go to wiserinvestor.com and you'll find it at the bottom of the page. Now on to today's episode.
Welcome to a Wiser Retirement podcast where we believe the best financial advice should always be conflict-free. I'm your host, Casey Smith. Guiding you to financial freedom today are my co-hosts, Missie Beach and Michaela Laney. Hello.
Hey, Casey.
So today we're going to answer the question, how much money do you need for retirement? This is a loaded question. You're looking at me funny, Missy.
Yeah, are we going to answer that, Casey?
Well, maybe we can work out a formula because, here's the thing, is that this is not something that any person can answer. So if you're watching Susie Orman or anybody else, Dave Ramsey, anybody else that's sitting there talking to the masses and they're saying, you need to have X amount for retirement, tune in. There is no number for the masses. There's no formula. There's no 65% of what you made or 75% of what you made before. It's really comes down to each individual family.
Exactly. And, there's those other calculators that'll say, oh, you need 10x of what your current salary is at this age or 15x at this next milestone age. And I think well, how would they even know that? Because they haven't asked me what I want to spend in retirement or when I want to retire. So how can they tell me how much I should have in retirement savings at age 40 or 50 or 60? I mean, it's just so out of left field that these calculators want to aggregate these numbers.
Even our own 401k plan, every time I log in, it's you're on track for retirement. I'm like, what? Am I? How do you know that?
Yes, I know. Because when new clients will come on board and they'll do just that, they'll say, well, my employer, 401k says I'm on track. So I just want you guys to validate that. And I'm like, okay, well, that's really nice that your employer's plan is telling you that. But
those calculators are getting better, but they're not quite there yet. The least they ask, do you have other assets? That's nice. I haven't seen one yet to ask about pensions or anything like that, but I'm sure they exist somewhere. But yeah, I mean, that's better than nothing because some people, majority of people do no financial planning whatsoever. So that, for most people, they log in and they say, you're not on track for retirement. That's what it's going to say.
Yeah.
Only if they come here or where they even probably have a chance of being on track for retirement, right? Meaning that, it's kind of like that. There was that whole study done. It's called Freakonomics. This came out a long time ago. And there's a book. There's even a short movie about it. You'll probably find that on Netflix. But it said, does reading a parenting book make you a better parent? And so they did this long study, and basically the answer is no. It's the fact that you wanted to read a parenting book that made you a better parent, not the fact that you read a parenting book.
The intent. It's all about intent.
It was the intent.
The heart behind it.
And then they went to some underprivileged neighborhoods and found people with just crazy names. My wife's a school teacher. There was a no joke. There's a kid in the class one time named Shahid. Spelled Shithead.
Oh
my.
Right? So they did this whole study of does your name help you with your place in life in the future? And so then they go into the future and they find people with names like that. And really there is actually no correlation between your name and success. Which I have a really hard time believing that. But again, basically it's an economist and a psychological person, psychologist that got paired together that did this book.
That's good. I am chuckling inside because I once had a client tell me that my name sounded like a stripper name.
Oh, geez.
What?
Missie Beach.
Oh my God.
So I'm glad there's no correlation.
Yes.
And I can still continue financial advising.
Yeah.
I never would have.
Missie
I never
Beach.
would have put that together.
I
Okay.
never would have either.
I would ask more questions about their background after that comment.
It's okay. They were a good client.
But anyways, so there's really not a way that you can tell the masses, this is how much you need to have for retirement. But there are ways that we can help you figure that out on your own. That make it a little more personable. And the first place you always start is where? Your expenses, right? So how much is it going to cost you to live in retirement, right? So it helps answer the question of how much will you need to have saved for retirement will be based on how much you need to have in expenses.
Right.
Right. And then it goes back behind that. How much you need in expenses can be greatly manipulated depending on how much time you have left prior to retirement. So, I would like to think that most people would want to have lots of discretionary income in retirement, but that's not how people save. People save, or people don't save. People carry a lot of debt. Just as Americans, we carry a lot of debt. So we carry that into retirement thinking that's going to be okay. Or 5 years prior to retirement, we realize that's not okay, and we got to get rid of some of this debt. If had done that 2 decades prior, then think about the wealth people could have amassed, right? So I look at it this way: is you have to start with their basic principles. One, you've got to eliminate stupid debt.
Cash flow freedom.
Right. So what do we call stupid debt? What's stupid debt? What do we see?
Credit cards.
Yes. Amex at 25% to get airline points.
Oh, we saw 29.
We did see they're up to 29.
29 now.
This week. Yep.
For the Amex specifically.
So 29%. That's crazy.
Just buy your airplane ticket.
I know
Yes.
that's what I was just thinking.
Because otherwise, whenever
You
you
could probably
put
buy
on
a
the
first
card-
class ticket anywhere in the U.S.
With all the interest you've
Yes.
paid. Absolutely.
Precisely.
That's
Oh,
insane.
stupid
all right, so
debt. Yeah.
no stupid debt. Eliminate that. And really, car debt really needs to go away.
Yeah, we're seeing
Especially now.
a lot these days.
Well, cars got so expensive, but the problem is even for new cars, unless you find a promotion, you're still paying 4.5% for a new car. Used car could be as high as 7.25%, 7.5%. If you have a credit blemish, I'm sure it goes higher than that. We don't see that a whole lot, but
No. Yeah, fortunately, our clients tend to have really good credit. But you're right. But people are financing cars at like tremendous rates that we've never seen before. And so I'm trying to get across to all our wiser clients is, okay, let's end the cycle of the
Yeah.
car financing. Like,
Right.
let this one be your last one when it's paid off, and then build up the cash savings to purchase the next one, because you got to get out of the cycle.
it's harder to take a car longer when you see everyone else has new cars. It's harder. You have to live your life in your lane and do things a little differently. What is it Dave says? Live like no one else today so you can live like no one else tomorrow.
I like that.
And that's very true sometimes. Even for wealthy families, they're very wealthy families, I would say. You just have to make better choices with.
But I feel
money.
like clients now are mentioning how, they see other people that are wealthy that drive their cars till the wheels fall off. And
Sure.
they've heard me mention on our podcast before how my car's 20 years old. And they're like, what do you drive, Missie? And so I think there's an awareness out there when they can latch on to like, oh, it's okay if someone else is doing it. Because there must be something right behind that.
Right.
If there's like a quote normal person doing it and it works for them and it's not out of necessity necessarily. Like, sure, all of our wiser clients could go out and buy like a nice, shiny new car, but you don't have to. Because you've got your eye on the long-term prize of retirement, and we've built that into the plan.
As far as mortgages goes, we'd like to see those eliminated prior to retirement. We actually have a mortgage payoff calculator that's on our website. We can link that in our show notes for you, and you can put in what you're currently paying, what you owe, your interest rate, and then, hey, if I send extra amount to the mortgage, how much interest am I saving? And when you do that, people are amazed how much interest they're saving. And in fact, we're starting to see some people who have moved into the area who've just found us, and they have these 5 to 6.5% 30-year mortgages. And when you send in just an extra $500 a month, it saves a ton of money.
It does. We had one come in the other day, and one of our clients, it was like if they put, I think it was right at $500 additional a month, they would save over $150,000 on their mortgage in interest savings alone. And so it's really incredible to see how 500 can be a lot out of your, monthly expenses, but at the same time, 150,000 is a lot more to have towards building your own wealth.
Absolutely. That's less money out of the banker's pocket.
Exactly.
Or more money out of the banker's pocket. And a
good exercise, even clients with the really low mortgage rates, 2.875, 3%, the interest savings is still really significant over a 30-year loan if they're going to pay it down early. So, I would encourage clients to go online and just check out that mortgage calculator if they haven't been in to see us in a while. Because, if you're going to save 50 grand over the life of a mortgage, that's 50 grand in your pocket and not the mortgage company's pocket. So,
exactly.
And cash flow freedom. There we go again.
The big thing for me is making sure that the payoff date in that calculator is less than or equal to your retirement date.
Yes.
That's the important part. If you can't get there, then if you have enough saved for retirement, we can build into the plan. We look at the amortization schedule. We build into the plan a payoff at retirement, and we do the tax calculations for that. Sometimes it's better to wait till the following year, but that's important. So we say all this. We spent 10 minutes talking about paying off debt because retirement's about cash flow, right? It has less to do about rate of return and more about free cash flow. Mm-hmm. So the way to free up cash flow is to have less going out and more coming in. And you do that by having less payments. So if you don't have payments, you can live on less. You wonder, how do people live on $35,000, $40,000 a year in retirement? It's very possible when there's no money going out.
Oh, gosh,
right?
Yeah.
You pay your utilities and you're done, right?
Exactly.
So that's how that's possible. But we work with clients all different spectrums. We have clients at $250,000 a year. If they had income less than that, they would panic.
Oh yeah.
And then we have clients at the $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 level that are as happy as can be, doing everything that they want to do.
Everything they want to. Yes, I know.
So again, that's why it's all variable on how much you need for retirement. So you've got that. I have to throw in emergency reserves. Mm-hmm. Even in retirement, you got to have probably about 2 years worth of expenses in some type of a cash account. We do that automatically for our clients that we're managing assets for. They always have 2 years worth of expenses inside their portfolio as a buffer for bad market years. So we don't have to liquidate out of fear, right?
Yes. And I think that makes clients rest so easy and just gives them that peace of mind that they're not the ones having to control like when to take money out. And They know that we are managing that portfolio and there's always going to be cash to send out to them. And we are not selling when their portfolio's at the very bottom of the market. And cash just magically appears just like a paycheck.
So Missy and Michaela, you guys both do the bulk of the financial planning here right now. And you use some software. It's called Money Guide Pro. You guys are very good at manipulating that software to get the best outcomes for clients. The software is looking at 1,000 stock and bond market scenarios, is taking into account inflation for healthcare, inflation for living expenses, which are two different rates. It's taking into account market volatility. You simulate the great financial crisis happening all over again during a client's retirement years. And in the end, We know that we have a 100% chance of not running out of money before typically age 95. Even if there's a great financial crisis again, we have a 100% chance of getting through that crisis without a client having to change their lifestyle. We have our own custom portfolios that we put into the modeling software. So we know exactly, it's apples and apples. It's not theoretical. It's real portfolios that we're building inside there, right? And then that's executed. Brad takes care of that on the planning side. So it's all this checks and balances and conservative analytics. It goes into all this. It's a software program we pay a lot of money for. In the end, that's great. But if we're going to do this by hand, we're riding in the shuttle and we're riding in a rocket and the computer shut out and we have to do manual math.
Oh.
How would we do this? How do we actually tell our listeners this is how you calculate how much you need for retirement? So let's go through this. What's our first step?
Well, first I think is figuring out your expenses like we just talked about.
Yep.
And then really taking a holistic view of your expenses of figuring out, okay, how much are we really going to spend on eating out, dining out, travel, and retirement?
So I got my expense number. So let's you guys love it when I do this, right? Somebody toss me a pen. And I'll have to use a computer as a calculator because I don't. Thank you. Producer Ken there.
You said you were doing it all by hand.
I am doing it by hand. I'm doing it right on a
do
piece
long
of paper.
division.
Oh, I'm not doing long division. Too old for that.
To an extent, by hand.
I just want my Mac to give me a calculator, which it's got to be in here somewhere. All right. So we know our expenses. So let's make up a number. What's a good average American household expense?
For retirement?
For retirement, yeah.
$5,000? $6,000?
Okay, per month.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
we'll call it 60,000
$60,000 per year.
per year, and this is going to be all after taxes, right?
Right.
Yes.
Because we always do our planning after tax, and then our software will figure out the tax liability. We're taking into account taxes today. We don't want to get into that. Although actually that would be pretty simple. But anyway, okay. So we need $60,000 a year. And are we married? Is this a married couple?
Yes.
Yes, we're married. So we have two. We have husband. We have wife. And so what's the next thing?
Figure out their income sources.
There we go. So let's say they worked. They sit and they're going to save money into a 401k. So we don't have pensions, but we have Social Security.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say they make maybe 100 or 200, 100,000 each is what they're making now.
Sounds
So
good.
Social Security on making $100,000 each. This is just a swag at this point, but probably around $2,500 a month, wouldn't
Sure.
you say, in today's dollars?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So $2,500 a month. I do that times 12. I think you guys got a little too low on the
Expenses.
on the expenses.
Yeah.
Is what I
Let's
think.
go to 80 grand for our expenses.
All right, so 80,000 a year in expenses. That makes more sense.
If they're making 200 today.
So yeah, that would be less. See, that's where the calculators are crazy because they're like, oh, you can live on 75% of your income, and I've never actually really seen that without a pension in the background.
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting, or a business being sold. Okay, so we have basically, if we go to 80,000 a year, that is equivalent to 6,000. That's a terrible number. $6,666 a month, and we need to make $80,001 a year, or spend. And then we have $5,000 a month that we're pulling out from, or we have in Social Security, right? So that's about $1,666 a month that we have in a deficit right now. So 16, let's call it 1,700 a month times 12. And what I'm doing is I'm analyzing all these numbers. That's about $20,400 a year. Now let's talk about this rule. This is the 4% rule, right? So the 4% rule is when you retire, you can pull out 4% per year, and then you increase that each year by the rate of inflation, so that you never actually run out of money. It does spend down. The 4% rule, it does spend down. It doesn't protect principal, but it will spend down.
Which is a good rule of thumb, but in most plans, it's not going to be a steady 4%.
Correct.
Like you're going to retire early in many cases. So you're going to have a huge percentage in the early retirement years. Yeah. And then hopefully it drops
lower. Yeah. But then this is rough math calculation.
Back of the envelope.
This is not what our software would generate necessarily. So if we have $20,400 a year in need, but we apply that we would withdraw 4% per year. Mm-hmm. Again, we still have to gross up for inflation. We have to gross up for taxes, right? But $20,400 a year, you divide that by 4%. So that gives you $510,000. You'd have to have a portfolio of $510,000 in addition to your Social Security to live on $80,000 a year.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that gives you a rough number. Now, your $80,000 is going to increase at 2.5% per year, right? Your living expense. Mm-hmm. That's the inflation number I would use, because the Fed target rate's 2%. I mean, inflation over the last year has now dropped to 4%. So we're getting closer to that target rate. And then at $80,000 a year, living in Georgia at age 65, you wouldn't be paying income tax. After your standard deduction of roughly $24,000, you pay very little federal tax. So that's not a huge tax liability. So if you gross up a little bit, maybe it's closer to $600,000 is what you would need, but you're in that ballpark. So there you go. Take what your guaranteed income is, subtract that from what your income need is, take your, or from your expenses, sorry, and then take your, the gap, multiply it times 12, do that, divide that number by 4%. Mm-hmm. That's a really good start.
Exactly. That's so much better than any online calculator.
And I feel like that's even a shocking number for a lot of people, because I just saw a study that was done the other day that most Americans actually believe that in order to be ready for retirement or to have enough money in the bank to be considered rich would be $2.2 million. And so really having even to do the calculation and realize that, $500,000 if you're retiring at full retirement age, to be able to have your Social Security already really is a fairly achievable number for most people. Now,
if you retire prior to full Social Security age, then all this changes. So this is probably assuming you're taking Social Security at 67.
Right.
So you retire at 67, immediately take Social Security. There is a path that you could retire sooner, but you need a higher number. You need more than 510,000. You're going to need a bigger number, because you shouldn't be taking Social Security early. Really, you should be delaying until 70 if you can. Exactly. And that's where the financial planning software will look at this. It'll look at all the income possibilities and come up with a more straight line process for you. So you could retire sooner. You spend down your own assets longer until you get to age 70, take the maximum Social Security. You don't touch the portfolio for another decade. It grows more, right? Mm-hmm. And then in older age, you'd have to start taking it again because of inflation. But that's where advanced planning tools come in, and the benefit of working with financial planners versus a computer model, right?
Definitely. Exactly. Yeah, we had a client couple just yesterday where they wanted to retire early, and so they had a big portfolio drawdown between early retirement and Social Security, where it was a deficit. But then once Social Security hit, their retirement spending was minimal, so they actually went into a surplus for many years until inflation caught up with them again and they lost purchasing power.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing too. I think it's really easy to do, back of the napkin math and retire tomorrow. It's really hard to stay retired a decade later with inflation rates, especially now. But even when they were just 2% or 1% or manufactured by the government for a whole decade, it was still hard to be retired 10 years later, but especially in this environment that we're in right now.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's the value of updating the plan every year. You can see where, that past year has gotten you.
Yeah.
And, are you still on track? Is that same level of spending still going to give you the same probability of success? And do you want to adjust it, So that's the key of having that living plan versus just okay, well, Casey said I could spend $80,000 for the rest of my life. Bye.
Right. Exactly. So again, this is just a theoretical, made up, we didn't even talk about this before we started recording this. So don't beat us up on how can people who are making 200,000 live on 80, right? Don't beat us up on that. But that's something to think about. I will say that there are we work a lot of families that have really high income, but their expenses are so low that when they get to retirement, it doesn't even really faze them. Because if you're making $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $800,000 a year, there's so much being paid in tax that you won't pay. There's so much even in debt that you wouldn't be paying anymore. Just think about medical costs sometimes come way down in retirement for more wealthy families. Yep. You also have all those 401k contributions that are no longer being contributed to, or deferred comp plans that you're no longer contributing to. So when you really look at your net paycheck, how much is really hitting your pocket in the end? And that's if you compare it to that number, you're really not that far off on take-home pay.
And definitely, I think that is one of the more difficult questions for clients when they come in, is asking them what they expect to spend in retirement, because they only know their current situation. And it's so hard to step outside of, oh, well, yeah, I make this amount, so I need this amount. But it's like, oh, well, actually, when I take out the maximum contribution that I'm doing to my 401k and I take out, the mortgage that I'll have paid off and all of that, it ends up that they're like, we could live on like $2,000. And you're like, okay, maybe not that low. Don't do that.
Because you do want to leave your house.
Exactly.
Right. But anyway, hopefully that helps people kind of, calculate that. That's a real process to calculate something versus what you see online. Ultimately, either hiring us to do financial planning and retirement portfolio management, or even just hiring us by the hour to do these calculations for you using our software. That's the better approach. If you don't choose us, then I always say find a fiduciary fee only, not fee based, but fee only planner somewhere that can help you do these calculations. Ultimately, I think that we've never had a situation where the math was wrong. A lot of times, people just don't know how to stop spending money, and that's a whole different discussion. We want to use very conservative numbers where you go online. I think, Missy, you were talking about this earlier before we got started. You go online and it allows people to put in their own rate of return. And so people are putting in like 7-8%. We're in retirement. We're using numbers like less of 3%.
Yeah.
A total return after inflation. So you want to use really conservative numbers when you're doing this type of planning, because there was a lost decade not that long ago. The 2000 to 2010 was a flat rate of return for the S&P 500. So you want to be prepared for that, and the best way to do it is to plan for the worst case scenario. The good news is when we have outsized returns, like for example, we have clients that recently had wanted to buy a car, but because they had lived below the plan, and then the plan's so conservative, we're able to pay cash for a car.
Yep.
Right? Because they have like a 99% chance of not running out of money before 100.
Yeah.
And so there's excess cash in there in the plan to be able to pull out, and it works okay.
Yeah, so at those meetings, it's great to be able to deliver good news like that. So, okay, when we did this update, wow, your probability of success has skyrocketed because of market outperformance. So this is the time.
Right.
Take some of that off the table. Go buy your car for cash.
And then it also gives you very good peace of mind when you have like a 2022.
Yeah.
And then the plan doesn't change. The plan already taking that into account. In fact, it was better than the financial crisis.
Yeah,
2022
exactly.
was, right? So the probability of success may drop slightly, maybe a couple of percentage points, but in the end, you're still doing just fine. And that allows me to sleep at night. Because I can't imagine being a firm that just does asset management with no financial planning, no real planning attached.
Yeah. Planning.
You'd have to have portfolio conversations every time you talk to somebody, and you can't control the markets. Nobody can.
No.
So you have to put all your calculations into the planning side.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, 2022, it was no one's fault. The market was just down universally across the board. So that's just a fact of life.
You know what looks really good is 10 years ago. Yeah. Meaning, if you look back at your portfolio over the last 10 years, it has been a great decade. Great decade. And it was not in a straight up line. There was some nasty stuff that happened over the last 10 years. But for a patient investor, you have a very high rate of return. That's what you have to focus on over the long term. So we have other podcasts where we talk about this. How much can you spend in retirement? Episode 158 is a good one to listen to. Episode 115. I don't like this title as much, but what could happen if you don't prepare for retirement?
Bad stuff.
Yeah, bad stuff. Bad juju. We also have a Wiser Retirement YouTube channel. You can watch us. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you can watch us live on the video as we record the podcast. And also, we have extras that we put in there with Missy, Michaela, Brad, and myself. How much is enough to retire is a video that will be linked in our show notes. But yeah, thanks for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in learning more about Wiser Wealth Management or want to schedule a consultation to meet with one of our fiduciary financial advisors like Missy, Michaela, you can do so by going to wiserinvestor.com, or you can click on the link in our episode notes. Thanks for your time today, guys.
All right.
See you
Thanks,
soon.
Casey.
Thanks for listening to a Wiser Retirement podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're listening. That way you don't miss any new episodes. We'd also appreciate if you could leave a rating and review. If you have any questions about anything that was discussed today, head to wiserinvestor.com and reach out. This episode was produced and edited by Ken Hoadley.